President Donald Trump has already brought about quite a lot of disruption and change to U.S. foreign policy. And I think, we're seeing part of that being reflected in his choice of foreign travel and his choice of destination. But to my mind, it's not altogether surprising because, in a sense, the Gulf states tick all the right boxes for President Donald Trump. So the GCC, the six Arab Gulf states as a bloc, run a trade deficit or overall have a balanced trading relationship with the U.S. That's very important to President Trump. These six countries buy a lot of U.S. weapons as well. And they have promised to invest collectively over $2 trillion.
U.S. President Donald Trump is going to be on a three-country visit. This is his first foreign visit after assuming office for the second time. The first time around when he assumed office, he went to Saudi Arabia. This time around also, it is Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. Historic in many ways than one, because this shows a shift in US's foreign policy in terms of the focus that it has on West Asia, or what they call the Gulf. To discuss this and more, and how important this visit is going to be, I'm being joined by Dr. Hasan Alhasan. He's a senior fellow for Middle East policy at IISS, International Institute for Strategic Studies, based out of Bahrain. Dr. Hasan, thank you so much for joining us here on the network. Let's begin with the visit. How significant is this three-country visit for the region and for America?
Well, thanks for having me. It is a significant but not altogether surprising choice of destination for President Donald Trump. It's significant because, as you rightly mentioned, this is his first planned visit. He did go to attend the Pope's funeral, but this was his first planned visit in his second term, and it was also the same choice of destination as his first term. And I think President Donald Trump has already brought about quite a lot of disruption and change to U.S. foreign policy. And I think, we're seeing part of that being reflected in his choice of foreign travel and his choice of destination. But to my mind, it's not altogether surprising because, in a sense, the Gulf states tick all the right boxes for President Donald Trump. So the GCC, the six Arab Gulf states as a bloc, run a trade deficit or overall have a balanced trading relationship with the U.S. That's very important to President Trump. These six countries buy a lot of U.S. weapons as well. And they have promised to invest collectively over $2 trillion into the U.S. economy. And so these are countries that run a balanced trading relationship. They buy a lot of weapons and they pledge to invest a lot of money into the U.S. economy. And these are all things that matter very much to President Donald Trump's economic agenda, both at home and abroad. These countries have also become significant partners for President Trump's foreign policy agenda. So this is someone who came into office pledging to put an end to a lot of the conflicts, be they in the Middle East, in Gaza, or in Ukraine. And Saudi Arabia has hosted Russia-Ukraine war talks. Oman has hosted U.S. Houthi ceasefire negotiations. And they've also hosted multiple rounds of U.S. Iran talks to put the lid on Iran's nuclear program. And of course, Qatar continues to play an important mediating role in Gaza. So not only are these states positioning themselves economically vis-a-vis the Trump administration, they've also managed to make themselves quite important to President Trump's foreign policy agenda as well.
Okay, we will talk about the strategic aspects, the wish list, and go country by country. But before that, Hasan, let's just talk about the visit itself. How much is it personal? How invested is Donald Trump, not just the president, in West Asia, in the Gulf, particularly in Saudi Arabia? The last time around, we saw a lot of focus because of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the policies on Israel, so on and so forth, but also a lot of the investments. So how much of it is Donald Trump personally invested in the region?
That's right. So the Trump Organization, which President Donald Trump suggests is sort of separate in the sense that he doesn't exercise a direct role in overseeing, but nevertheless, I think reflects the broad business and commercial interests of his family and some of his close relatives. So the Trump Organization has a significant business interest in the Gulf. The Trump Organization already runs a luxury golf course in Dubai. It's partnering with a Saudi-based and Qatari-based real estate investment firms to build luxury golf courses and luxury hotels in multiple Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE. Jared Kushner has been able, who's President Trump's son-in-law, has been able to raise billions in capital for his investment outfit, Affinity Partners, um, over $1.4 billion just last year. And of course, President Trump's sort of broad cryptocurrency venture has also managed to secure an investment pledge from the UAE. So, in a sense, I think there is an alignment in the Trump family's business interests, along with the broad geopolitical and geoeconomic alignment of interest between what the Trump administration is trying to do and the Arab Gulf states. This is part of the Gulf states, I think, toolkit of economic statecraft. Washington, D.C. Is a place where many different countries and stakeholders compete for influence, and they do so in various ways. And this is one way I think that countries in this part of the world are able also to exert themselves on the political agenda in Washington, D.C.
Okay, let's just talk about country-wise wish list. What is it that you're looking at, and the focus is going to be when it comes to Saudi Arabia? A lot has changed. In the first term, a lot of the focus was on Israel. This time around, there is a shift. They're looking at how Saudi Arabia can invest in the United States of America, and no longer is Washington demanding that Riyadh recognize Israel in exchange for nuclear cooperation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that by comparison to what the Biden administration is trying to achieve, or was trying to achieve, obviously, the Trump administration has decentered the U.S.-Saudi relationship away from the question of normalization. And I think it's probably a clear-eyed and accurate recognition that given the current political configuration in Israel, which is extremist and right-wing and even some would say fascist, it's very difficult, I think, and highly unlikely that the Israelis will meet these precondition that Saudi Arabia has very clearly laid out, that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has very clearly laid out on multiple occasions, that there will be no normalization with Israel unless there is a Palestinian state. And I think this is a condition to which the Netanyahu government is extremely unlikely to exceed. And I think that the Trump administration sort of recognizes this and it realizes that there is potential for progress and for mutually beneficial ventures on the bilateral level. And I think there is a mutual understanding that the question of Israeli normalization shouldn't really stand in the way of U.S.-Saudi relations. Now, if we look at what the Saudis are trying to achieve and what the Trump administration is trying to achieve in Saudi Arabia. Clearly, the Saudis want and so do the Emiratis, I think, a loosening of restrictions on their ability to access advanced U.S. technology, including semiconductors and AI. And at the same time, I think the Trump administration wants to make it easier for Saudi and Emirati investors, especially state-owned investors and sovereign wealth funds, to be able to put a lot of money into the U.S. economy. And this is something that is front and center of Trump's broader economic agenda. So I think a lot of this will revolve around access to technology. Arms and weapons sales will be a very important part of this, and there is speculation that Trump could unveil $100 billion weapons package when he visits Saudi Arabia. The Trump administration has already approved the sale of significant arms sales to Saudi Arabia over the past few months, including laser-guided munitions, advanced air-to-air missiles. and so on. And I think there's also going to be a geopolitical discussion, of course, because Saudi Arabia is an important regional player, and it's definitely going to have a degree of influence when it comes to broader geopolitical issues, including the future of Syria, how to resolve the conflict in Gaza, and of course, Iran's nuclear program as well.
Right. In all this, the shift in policy, the shift in focus, how does then, where does IMEC lie? Because there was a lot of conversation on normalization of ties with Israel. To have that entire project of India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor going, is this a setback, the shift in policy?
IMEC, I think, is very much a Biden era initiative that, for the time being, has been put to bed. So these grand geoeconomic strategies were part and parcel of the Biden administration's toolkit that really tried to, I think, provide some alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And IMEC was part of that. There were, of course, other initiatives as well, including the PGII, the Partnership on Global Investment in Infrastructure, the Blue Dot Network, and other similar initiatives that never really saw the light of day. And I don't think IMEC is any different. I think President Trump is focused more on US-centric initiatives, on attracting investments into the United States, on ensuring that the US gets better trading deals. And so I think that we're unlikely to see the same degree of interest by the Trump administration in underwriting or providing at least political and diplomatic cover for initiatives that don't really involve the United States in a direct manner. I think President Trump has already shown himself to be very capable of disregarding Israeli interests if and when that is suitable for his own interests. So the Trump administration has clearly left Israel to dry by concluding a ceasefire agreement with the Houthis that
Yeah.
apparently doesn't include Israel, and by engaging in direct talks with Iran and now potentially again with Hamas, which has recently released a U.S. hostage over Israel's head, essentially.
Right. Also, it's very interesting. Before I go to the UAE and Qatar, Hassan, just one more question on Saudi Arabia. We talk about the civil nuclear program, but is this a nuclear race that will kick off in that part of the world, including Persia, including Iran, because Iran is already on its way to a nuclear weapon. They say that there are reports that suggest that Israel might possess some covert nuclear weapons. We do not have confirmation on that. But with Saudi Arabia now starting a civil nuclear program, not a nuclear weapons program, which is what was the pretext for Iran as well. Are we starting a nuclear race here?
So I think the issue of civil nuclear, Saudi Arabia's access to civil nuclear technology, is obviously something that's very much enshrined in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So of course, Saudi Arabia has the right, according to the NPT, to access civil nuclear energy and to even to enrich uranium domestically. This is very much foreseen in the NPT as a right that Saudi Arabia is able to exercise. Now, the issue is that traditionally, there have been concerns about potential nuclear proliferation. And I think those concerns were exacerbated when Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman came out very publicly and stated that if Iran were to obtain nuclear weapons, that Saudi Arabia would most certainly do the same. And so I think that has exacerbated these concerns. There have been negotiations over the past few years with the Biden administration to reach a safeguards agreement that would provide a degree of confidence that Saudi Arabia is unlikely to divert its civil nuclear program to non-civil or non-peaceful means. The issue is that Saudi Arabia is unlikely to accept anything less than what Iran has. So if Iran is allowed to enrich uranium domestically, there is simply pretty much no way that Saudi Arabia would accept not to be able to do so. And so Saudi Arabia will demand a parity in terms with Iran as far as its civil nuclear program is concerned. The other challenge I think that the U.S. recognizes, and the reason why it continues to engage with Saudi Arabia on this issue, despite the proliferation concerns, is that if the U.S. doesn't provide Saudi Arabia with access to civil nuclear energy technology, then someone else will. And that someone else could very well be China. And so China may not necessarily demand the same level of safeguards that the US will, and the US will have simply very little say into the process. So I think, in a sense, that horse has buckled, and Saudi Arabia is adamant on pursuing a civil nuclear program. I think the Saudis would prefer to be able to do it with the US and to reach a safeguards agreement that would be mutually beneficial. But I think that if the Saudis found themselves to be in essentially to have reached a dead end with the Americans, I wouldn't be surprised if very overtly they start looking elsewhere.
Well, the fact that you mentioned China, let's move to the UAE. AI dominance, a lot of conversation on tech and AI, artificial intelligence, but also America trying to make that move to get the Chinese in the semiconductor or chip industry out of this market and maybe get some sort of or gain some ground there. Is that one of the focus areas for Trump when he's in Abu Dhabi?
Most definitely. I think technology is going to be a very central issue in US UAE discussions. When the UAE delegation visited Washington in March, it was obviously led by the UAE's national security advisor and the ruler's half-brother, Sheikh Tahnoun bin Zayed, who is also the UAE's de facto technology czar. And during that visit, he pledged to invest $1.4 trillion into the US economy. And this is the man who controls some of the largest and wealthiest sovereign wealth funds in the world, including ADQ and others. The point being here is that technology is going to be very important. The UAE, perhaps with the exception of Israel, is the most advanced country in the Middle East, and certainly the most ambitious when it comes to emerging and disruptive technology. But the UAE has, I think, has chosen to move closer to the US than to China on AI, because I think the UAE recognizes that the US continues to have an advantage for the time being in this space. But I think the UAE has already showed itself to be adaptive and nimble enough to really to be able to shift its position as the situation changes. And of course, AI is a field that I think can be full of surprises. We all remember the disruptive effect that DeepSeek had, and I think the more we see China catching up to the US in this issue, it creates it creates a more level playing field and provides countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia that are trying to be players in this field with more options, and I think essentially enhances their bargaining power. But it does pose a major dilemma, because these investments into AI infrastructure can be very costly, and shifting from one supplier to another can also be extremely difficult and costly as well. But you're right, I think, to point out that technology is going to be at the center of the discussions.
Well, also very interesting over here, Hassan, the fact that, these countries in the Gulf, some of them have not had the best ties. Saudi Arabia and Qatar were at loggerheads not so long ago. And unlike Saudi Arabia or the UAE, Qatar, in fact, actually has very deep military relationship with the United States of America. They host American military through a base. There is military presence in Qatar. In all this, and the larger perspective of how Qatar is playing or has played peacemaker, mediator, in many an area that America was focused in or on, be it the Taliban negotiations, or for that matter, now we are seeing the Israel-Hamas negotiations. Qatar is critical. What's the focus over here? What brings Trump to Qatar?
I think the broader point to remember here is that this is a very changed region by comparison to a few years ago. And so, as you rightly pointed out, there are quite a bit of Gulf tensions between Qatar on the one hand, then Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain on the other. The Gulf states' relations with President Trump himself were not always very smooth. I mean, during his first term presidential campaign, he said, quite a few nasty things about the Gulf states, and actually, threatened to withdraw U.S. security assistance from Saudi Arabia on at least one or two occasions because of disagreements over Saudi Arabia's oil policy. So relations with Trump weren't always easy. Relations between the Gulf states and then with other regional players like Turkey and Iran haven't always been easy as well. And lo and behold, we're now in a situation where a lot of these relationships have stabilized and have de-escalated, and the Gulf states now have strong relationships with each other. They're aligned on many of the important regional issues. They have an ongoing dialogue with Iran and with Turkey, and their relations with even President Trump have become quite constructive. Now, when it comes to Qatar in particular, Qatar, I think, does have a very robust military relationship with the United States. It hosts the forward headquarters of the U.S. Central Command, and that involves a significant presence of personnel and capabilities. It's also an important political partner for the United States, and so the Qataris played a very important role in brokering the agreement between the U.S., which was negotiated and really a deal that was done under President Trump 1.0, and the Taliban in Afghanistan. It also played a very important role in the evacuation efforts that were managed by the Biden administration. And they're now again proving to be an important partner by working alongside with Egypt and the US to broker a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. So I think Qatar brings the military and the sort of geopolitical or diplomatic partnership to the table. And these are, I think, issues of enduring importance to the United States as well. Now, there are friction points as well, especially on the economic level. And so the United States is now the world's largest oil and gas producer. It competes with Qatar over global share of natural gas. And this is, of course, an economic friction point that sits on top of the tariffs and the 10% tariffs slapped on the GCC, which are some of the lowest in the world, but still, and the sectoral tariffs on steel and aluminum at 25% that also have an effect on Gulf exports.
Right. Again, the fact that he's going to be in the region but not going to Jerusalem has a lot of people concerned whether if the focus has changed and moved from what it was earlier, where the focus was this. What are the kind of conversations you expect that he'd have with the Gulf countries, with these important nations in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, particularly Qatar, when it comes to what's happening in Gaza? Are there red lines that they are going to talk about, these countries, with Trump administration on what Israel has done and how and where should Israel really stop? Or particularly Netanyahu?
So I think that Gaza and the broader Palestinian situation is obviously going to be on the table. And the Palestinian vice president, I believe, was in Saudi Arabia meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman just a few days ago. And of course, the Gulf states are important players. They exercise quite a bit of leverage in the region, and so I think that this discussion will be one that President Trump will want to have. Now, I think the Gulf states will want to focus on achieving a ceasefire, and that's going to be the most immediate and most pressing concern. Achieving a ceasefire and also ensuring the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza, keeping in mind that Israel has very much weaponized hunger and the withholding of aid and the situation, as UN agencies continue to remind us, in Gaza is extremely dire.
No, but
I
just
think
a ceasefire, Hassan, just a ceasefire, or go ahead and further talk about the fact that there's a plan for Netanyahu to take over Gaza, that they're going to go in. There's a three-phase plan, and that Donald Trump has also been talking about how Gaza needs to be taken over and made better. For whom?
That's right. I think these are where the difficulties essentially lie. And so that's why I think, the Gulf states and all of the Arab countries were very clear in rejecting President Trump's proposal to depopulate Gaza, which is essentially an endorsement on his part of the position of the extreme right wing in Israel. And so the Arab Gulf states have joined the rest of the Arab states in totally rejecting this idea of depopulation. There was an Arab League proposal to deploy an international peacekeeping force that would presumably be UN mandated, into which they would also contribute. And I think the Arab Gulf states have also supported Egypt's plan for the reconstruction of Gaza in a way that would not require the depopulation of Gaza's inhabitants. The issue is that I don't think the issue is that I think it's very difficult for the Gulf states to reach a convergence on views with the Trump administration, let alone with the Netanyahu government. And so I think because of the severe or let's say the glaring gap in expectations and preferences on the long-term plan for Gaza and sort of the post-ceasefire future of Gaza, I think most of the energy is going to be productively spent on achieving the most pressing and immediate concern, which is that of delivering humanitarian aid and ensuring a ceasefire. Once those things happen and the suffering of the Palestinian inhabitants of Gaza can be momentarily alleviated, I think you can then get into a more difficult discussion about the long-term governance and security and reconstruction of Gaza.
Okay, and my final question to you. Qatar is planning on gifting him a Boeing for his new, to be turned into his new Air Force One. How does that really sit for a U.S. president to be taking a freebie? Secondly, his own people are saying that this could be a very major security hazard, given that they'd have to go through the entire aircraft to check for any surveillance breaches.
So I think, in a sense, that will be up to the Americans and to the U.S. system really to decide whether it's appropriate for the U.S. president to be accepting gifts of this nature from a foreign country. I think from Qatar's perspective, Qatar recognizes that the United States, I think, is a very significant defense and security partner for Doha. It also recognizes that I think its reputation has suffered in Washington, D.C., partly because of the extremely polarized nature with which the Palestinian issue has been essentially viewed and discussed and deliberated on in the U.S., especially around university campuses and so on. And so I think from the Qatari perspective, it's an attempt at currying favor with the Trump administration and with President Trump himself, who ultimately is the leader of the most powerful country in the world. So I think from the Qatari standpoint, they will do whatever it is they can to, I think, solidify and strengthen that relationship for their own interests. And then obviously it's up to President Trump and the wider U.S. system to decide whether this is something that they would be willing to accept.
Well, it is going to be a significant visit. It's a three-country visit. Like you rightly said, this is his second visit, but the first scheduled foreign visit that he was to have, if not for the funeral of Pope Francis that he had to attend in Italy. That was not supposed to be his first visit. This is supposed to be his first official foreign policy visit when it comes to how the President of the United States of America chooses a country. And we've seen how most of them have chosen Mexico or Canada, the neighborhood, some the United Kingdom because of the traditional partnership. But a shift came about with Donald Trump choosing Saudi Arabia in his first term and now in his second term as well. Dr. Hasan Alhasan, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global.
Thanks for having me.